tonight, you can't be on the first floor at all. Because they're gonna put water or something on it to raise the top of the wood. And you can't walk on it.
Hey, John.
There's an end in sight.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a slightly unique, different Bible class in an effort to stay warm. But we've done this before. Like, you've had Bible class in the sanctuary before. You're all going to be fine today. If you can't read what's on the TV screen right now, you're going to have a harder time reading some of the other words later on. And so if you're having trouble seeing this, then I encourage you to move up a couple pews. And I am curious as to why if we're putting this in nautical terms, okay, port side, this side is listing a little heavily this way. So I don't know if this is your normal spot for worship or if this is just your spot of the day, but that doesn't matter too much. Get comfortable wherever you'd like to be. Let's open with a word of prayer, and then we'll dive into today's topic. So let's pray. Lord Jesus, as we are in the end of the church year right now and looking forward to a brand new season of Advent, we take some time to remember that we live and move and breathe in a period between the two Advents. We rejoice that you have already come into this world as an infant and grew up for our sake, living as we do, suffering beyond what we're capable of, and dying and rising again for all of us. But we also look forward to the second Advent, your second coming, when you will return to this earth and make everything new and right again. And while we wait in this time between the Advents, we just give you thanks that you are still hard at work in this world. You are daily making all things new according to your gracious will. And so I ask that you would give us all faith to just cling to your promises and to trust in you, that you are heavily involved in the world today, even when we cannot see or feel you, O Lord. We ask that you would give us the faith to cling to your promises, that you will return to us soon and make everything right. And so be with us during this season of the church year as we move from the end to another season of Advent, and bless this time that we have together in the sanctuary for Bible class today. In your name we pray. Amen. Today is a really fun day. This is Paul's final sailing journey, and there are a lot of nautical terms that I'm going to teach you today, because in the previous missionary journeys that we've looked at, they mostly just go from point A to point B. There's not really a lot that happens like overseas itself, but today is much, much different. And so we're going to be looking at all of Acts chapter 27. If you didn't bring a Bible with you, there are conveniently Bibles in front of you in the pews, so just grab the nearest Bible, whether it belongs to you or not, and turn to Acts chapter 27. While you're turning there, I want to give you, if this will work, I want to give you a rundown of what happens after Paul's third missionary journey and before this final journey to Rome. And also, why is Paul going to Rome? Isn't that like the heart of enemy territory? Isn't that a really bad idea? Well, if you remember the illustration that the prophet Agabus gave to Paul last time, that's when he took Paul's belt and bound his own hands and feet together and said, "This is what the Jews will do to you." Just to briefly go over what that looked like. So once Paul arrived in Jerusalem, right after the third missionary journey was completed, he was almost immediately arrested by the Jews and accused of two things. Paul was accused of false teachings and of defiling the temple, both of which in the Jews' eyes were wrong. And notice how this isn't identical to what Jesus himself was tried for, but it is somewhat similar. What ultimately did Jesus in legally was that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. That's what the Apostle John labels as, that's what they brought against him and accused him of. And that's how they were able to put him on trial, not just before the chief priests, but before the Romans. And so Paul, he's not accused of being the Son of God, but he is accused of being a real troublemaker. And so he's brought before the chief priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I don't know if this is the exact same group of people that oversaw Jesus' own trial. Maybe a mixture of, some of the old guard that were around in Jesus' day, maybe some new folks as well. We're not actually sure. But he presents a defense of the gospel before the chief priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And he makes the claim, hey, I'm just following what my Lord Jesus told me to do. He called me to action. God sent him, his son, into this world. So Paul presents a defense of the gospel before the Jews, and it kind of freaks the Romans out because Paul is a unique person, and we've talked about this before, because he holds dual citizenship. He's not just a Jew, he's also a Roman. And the Romans are getting uncomfortable with the Jews trying to take control of Paul's fate because they go, wait, Paul also belongs to us, and we should probably put him through our judicial system as well. And so after the chief priests and Pharisees are done with Paul, and they didn't really make any decision with him, they all hate him, but they can't make up their mind about what to do, Paul is whisked away by the Romans to the governor of the Jerusalem area, to Felix, the governor. And so Paul makes a very similar defense in front of Felix and just tells him about Jesus and his call. And what's interesting about Felix is that he termed out, like he essentially just stopped being the governor at some point, and he handed over the reins to Festus, this guy Festus, Felix's successor. And what's interesting about the end of Felix's time as governor is that he ends up throwing Paul in prison just like as a placeholder. And when he terms out, he doesn't bother to release him. And so then Paul spends 2 years in prison in the middle of a trial, just kind of rotting in jail, waiting for someone to do something with him. And so eventually Festus is like, we have this prisoner Paul. He's been sitting there a while. We should probably finish this trial. So Paul makes his defense of the gospel before Festus as well. And at this point, Paul starts playing a fun card. He starts appealing to Caesar and says, I would like to take my trial directly to Caesar. Caesar, of course, being the king of the Romans and essentially their god, the person that they worshiped. And so Paul wants to take his trial all the way to the top, to Caesar. But before he does that, he's brought before this guy named Agrippa. Now, it's not said in the text. I did some research to confirm this. But Agrippa is actually a King Herod. And this should trigger some familiar stories in our heads because Herod himself appears several times in Jesus' story. And there are like 6 different King Herods in the New Testament, so bear with me. This guy who's called Agrippa, but is actually a King Herod, is related to like pretty much all the other Herods that we meet. This Agrippa is the great-grandson of Herod the Great, which was the tetrarch of Galilee when Jesus was born. Herod the Great was the guy that wanted Jesus to be killed. He sent the wise men, fingers crossed behind his back. I would like to see this child as well. That's Herod the Great. This is Agrippa's great-grandfather. So same family. It gets more confusing too because Herod the Great's son, also King Herod, he was the guy that had John the Baptist beheaded. Yep. And so this is from the same line of scumbags that were kind of ruling as tetrarch over Galilee. But what's interesting about Paul making a defense to Agrippa is that Agrippa and Festus, the king and the governor, have this conversation, and they go, if this guy didn't just appeal to Caesar, then this is not working for me today. You'll have to bear with me. If this guy didn't keep appealing to Caesar, we would have let him go. So Festus and Agrippa have this conversation, and they find Paul not guilty of anything. They kind of want to release him. Kind of like Pontius Pilate, too. Saw Jesus as not guilty and not deserving of death. And so they kind of reach the same conclusion, but they go, man, Paul is just leveraging his citizenship in a way that he really shouldn't be if he's trying to get out. They would have let him go, but Paul kept appealing to Caesar. Now, of course, Paul is using this system and leveraging his identity to take the gospel into the heart of Rome, into the heart of Gentile territory. So it's all going according to Paul's plan. And then we get to Acts chapter 27, when the verdict is reached that, okay, Paul, fine, we'll send you to Caesar. You get your all-paid expenses trip to Caesar himself. You can talk with our king and our God and make your defense before him. That was a very short summary of Acts 21 through 26. It's actually really interesting to read on your own. Paul at one point starts calling people whitewashed walls. And he's just like getting impatient with the process and wants to go to Caesar and kind of loses his temper once or twice. So I encourage you to read over this on your own if you're like, I have so many questions about this. Today's not the day to answer those, but you can look at it on your own time. It's very entertaining. I highly recommend it. So this brings us to Acts chapter 27, the beginning of Paul's voyage. I want to begin by reading verses 1 through 8. And there's so much ground to cover. I'm so excited for today. So let's begin, starting at verse 1 of Acts chapter 27. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon. And Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. And there the centurion found the ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. Okay, Pastor Jason, that was way too many names and way too many terms. I'm going to try and break this down to make it as simple as possible. First of all, let's just go over who is with Paul at this point. What does Paul's, not necessarily a missionary team, but Paul always has like a team of people that he works with. And that is also the case here on this trip to Rome. Paul is not sailing away by himself. So obviously, we got Paul. Notice that Luke is here subtly. How do we know that Luke is with Paul at this point? It's a first-person narrative, and Luke is the author of Acts, and so Luke says it was decided that we should sail for Italy. So at the end of Paul's life, at the end of his journey, Luke is with him for each step of the way. So a very faithful and devout co-worker to Paul, and also was kind of busy writing his own work, a big, long work called the Gospel of Luke, which is just a great book. We should all read it. And there's one other person that we are a little bit familiar with, this guy, Aristarchus from Thessalonica. We don't know a ton about this guy. We met him, I believe, last week on his third missionary journey, but Aristarchus was someone from Thessalonica, which sounds like Thessalonians, right? And so this is a person that Paul met on his missionary travels and frequently accompanied Paul on journeys like this. And so Paul and Luke and Aristarchus, this is the team of three, the three Christians that sail to Rome from Jerusalem. But at the same time, there's also a centurion that his name is given to us, and his name is Julius. And just by his title, the centurion, how many people do you think Julius is in charge of? 100. Centurion kind of sounds like century, which is 100 years. And so it's not rocket science to put together that, hey, he's in charge of a group of 100 soldiers. And so the exact number of persons on this journey is given to us toward the very end. But for now, just assume that Julius is traveling with like a small private army of 100 or perhaps more soldiers. And there's other Roman prisoners that join them along the way. But this is not a small boat that we're talking about here. They need a lot of space to move around. This is a much bigger boat than like Paul had gone on in his missionary trips so far. So this is the group of people headed to Rome. Most of them are Gentiles. There's just a couple Christians on board. Now we have to talk about something called the lee. I have been waiting anxiously for this day to throw nautical terms at you. I was actually, a good friend of mine called me this morning and we talked for just a few minutes. He had a couple updates to give me and he asked me how the boat Bible class is going because he was one of the first people I told about it. And I told him about how today we're going to talk about all these sailing terms that I haven't had a chance to talk about before. And so I just went off for like a couple minutes about it. And then he was like, okay, Bible study. Don't forget. And I fired back at him, first article wisdom. This is the world that God made and how stuff interacts with it. So like, it's okay. And he thought about it and was like, all right, that's fair. So I have his permission to share all this stuff with you. Let's talk about these terms, sailing under the lee of something. If you're a sailor, let's just imagine that this point of reference here, this little red dot, let's imagine that this is an island. The way that wind works, if we have hypothetical wind coming from a direction, in this picture, it's coming from the northwest, okay? It's coming this way. If you've got any point of reference that wind is blowing toward, it interacts with it kind of weirdly. And there's two main sides of any point of reference that are helpful for sailors to know about. So you've got your windward side of the point of reference, the island. In other words, what part of the island is coming into direct contact with the wind? So it kind of makes sense that like the northwestern side of this island, the wind is hitting it directly. It's the windward side of the point of reference. The lee is the opposite side. It's this area right here where the wind is not directly touching it. It's kind of the opposite side of where the wind is connecting with. And in this little red kind of funnel, this cone right here, do you think that the wind is stronger here or weaker here? Weaker. Very good. That is correct. Because when wind blows up against something, it doesn't just like, curve directly around it and then keep going. It kind of spreads out a little bit and then it connects later on. So this is a calmer part. If this is like a whole island, the wind is not going to be as strong under the lee because the island is blocking the wind from going through. If you want to simulate this yourself, don't do it here, it'll spread germs. But if you put one hand in front of you like this and then just blow on it, so you'll be able to feel your breath. But if you put something in front of this hand and blow on this, you're not going to feel anything here. That's an example of the power of the lee. It blocks wind, essentially. And so if you're a sailor, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's a little different than sailing in any other like upwind part. So if you're in the lee, it is calmer, the wind is not as strong there, and therefore it's also harder to move around because you need wind to be able to move. If you have less of it, it's going to be harder to move. And so depending on the situation, sometimes the lee is the place you want to be, and sometimes it's not the place you want to be. But if you want shelter from the wind and you want it to be calmer, then you want to find the lee, this area here. Can I clarify anything about this before we move on? We're going to get to Bible study. We're going to get back to it. Don't worry. Questions? No? Okay. I bring this up because the word lee is used several times in this text, and Luke shares that we sailed under the lee of this thing. And so now you know what he means by that. And so one other thing about just how sailboats work in wind. This is more of a modern example, but in this picture, we've got the wind, it's essentially going directly south in this picture. And the sailboat is actually making progress, it's going north. How on earth is that possible? It's totally the opposite direction of where the wind is going. Sailboats they sail at these 45-degree angles, and they can cut across the wind, and you can go essentially in any direction you want. And so it's much more complicated and fun than just, the wind is going south, that means I have to go south if I'm in a sailboat. Not so. The only place you can't go is you cannot sail directly into the wind in a straight line. So this, you probably can't see, this is labeled no sail zone. Does anybody know the term of attempting to sail directly into the wind, like what that condition is called? Trouble, yes. It's called being stuck in irons. Called being stuck in irons. Very fittingly so, because if you're in prison and you're clasped in irons, you're not going anywhere. So if you're in a sailboat and you're pointing directly north with directly into the wind with no momentum in turning, which is called tacking, I'm not going to explain that. But if you're stuck in irons, you're not going anywhere. This will come into play later on a little bit. But just know that sailboats can pretty much go in any direction they want. And so I'm going to show some wind directions on maps later on. Don't wonder how on earth did they do that? The technology allowed for it. They were very smart. Okay, so here is Paul's entire route. I warned you, if you can't see this too well, move up a little bit. I'm assuming you aren't going to be able to read any of the names, but I can point this out to you. So Paul and the boys start here, kind of off the coast of Judea. They go to Sidon, and then they go directly north. You would think that they would just why don't I just make a straight line for Italy here. Look at how easy of a trip that could be. Well, the wind that they had to deal with was coming from the southwest. We know this. They needed to sail under the lee of Cyprus. And with the demonstration that I just gave you, if the wind is pushing up against Cyprus like this, the opposite side of it that's not directly touching the wind, that's the lee. We'll get to why they did this a little bit more in a second, but just for now, this was a very strong wind. And sailing under the lee lessened the effects of it, and it was slower but safer. It was slower but safer, especially with that many people on board. So they took a slower and safer way. They sailed under the lee of Cyprus. This can be confusing because, you would think under Cyprus, they should be here. They should be south, right? But that's not how it works in the nautical world. So they took the slower and safer route, and they were coasting along the coast here of Pamphylia, Lycia. This little, you can't see this at all, this place here, so roughly around the halfway point, or maybe a third of the journey, they stopped at the city called Cnidus. I don't think we've stopped here before. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. We're just going to roll with it. And they notice that the wind is preventing them from going in this direction because it's too strong. The wind is too strong, and also this right here, by the Aegean Sea, kind of Greece itself, is this massive archipelago. Archipelagos mess up the wind. Who knows what direction it's coming from? It makes it very unpredictable and unsafe. And so they decided, wind's coming from this direction. We can't go over here. We have to take another longer route that is hopefully safer, and we need to go south from here. And so they end up, come on. There. So they end up at, this is a big island right here, a pretty sizable island called Crete. They hadn't visited here before, but this is where they end up on their way to Italy and to Rome. And about halfway on the southern shore of the island is this place called the Fair Havens. And so this is where they stop. And it's been a slow journey so far, but not overly difficult. That will change fast. But this is kind of this is the route they took and the reason for it. They wanted to be safe, even though it took them a longer time. Okay? Questions? Or is this making sense for everybody? Cool. I was so excited about this day. Really, really gearing up for it. Okay, let's continue then. Bible study. Bible study. Let's read verses 9 through 12. It's not a long chunk, but a lot happens, and I have a lot to say about it. And so let's continue by picking up with verse 9. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Okay, so let's talk about sailing in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is modern research that I have done, but it stands to reason that how wind works in the Mediterranean Sea today, pretty similar to how it worked back then as well. And it has these predictable patterns that we can trace today that were also probably in effect back then. And my research checks out with what is going on in the text. So just hear me out. Just like temperature changes from season to season. Summer's a very hot time of year, typically. Winter's a very cold time of year. It depends on where you are in the world. Sometimes it's the reverse. But just like temperature, wind speeds, too, have a bit of a seasonal personality, depending on where you're at in the world. And so in the Mediterranean Sea, I looked at what does the wind do in every season? What do sailors need to be prepared for, depending on what time of year it is? And so here's what I found. The spring is like kind of a high-risk, high-reward sort of season. There are strong, consistent winds with heavy gusts, but it's not too overpowering. And so if you know what you're doing and you want to get somewhere fast, then you want to go sailing in the spring. You have to be seasoned and a veteran for this. So not for amateurs or novices. But if you know what you're doing, you can get around pretty quickly during the spring. You just got to be careful here and there if it gets too tough. Summer, much like a vacation, is pretty laid back. It's chill. The wind speeds tend to die down. It's much calmer. So it's a little safer to be traveling during the summer, but it's also slower. I'm an impatient person. And so I see summer and go, not interested. I would rather be, hauling and going faster. But summer is kind of a slower, calmer, milder time of year to go sailing. Fall is weird. No one could really agree on what happens in the fall. The one consistent thing I found is that autumn is inconsistent in the Mediterranean Sea. It's totally random. People don't know if it's going to be like a really harsh wind or a really calm wind, and it can change very quickly. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like winters in St. Louis sometimes, or in Missouri, because sometimes you can have snow up to your knees for a while, and the whole city shuts down, and no one knows what to do. And I've also experienced winters where like you wear a coat for 3 weeks and you're done, and you don't have to worry about it. So autumn is kind of like that. It's totally random, and we don't really know what's going on in the fall. Anything could happen. Winter, though, winter is not good. Winter is like spring, but on steroids. And the wind is also cold. But the wind is at its most dangerous in the winter. That is not a time of year to be sailing. Most ships want to be safely snuggled up in their spot in the harbor, and then they'll be brought back into commission in the spring. Winter is a huge risk to be sailing during that time of year. People try to avoid it. And this was one of the sources that I found. It can have gusts, so not like a consistent wind speed, but heavy gusts or puffs of wind can get up to 300 kilometers per hour. That is hurricane speeds without a hurricane around. That's terrifying. That is like very, very, very dangerous, and it endangers lives if you're doing this. And so, pop quiz, which season of the year was everybody trying to get to Rome in this text? No, it was actually winter. It was the end of autumn and the very beginning of winter. Verse 12, because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So winter is right around the corner. They're at the very tail end of autumn. This is not a good time for anybody to be sailing. Paul knows this, okay? This is a tangent. It will come back into play later. Just like how hurricanes are given pet names, so are like general channels of winds. They're given names as well. And so you don't need to know any of these. But all of these winds here are kind of like famous in the Mediterranean. These are their modern names, not their ancient names, is what people call them today. So not all of these winds are in effect all at the same time, but there are patterns where like seasonally they tend to show up and be much stronger. So during the winter, this wind right here, the Bora, and this wind, the Mistral, these are the two winds that are the most identifiable and the most commonly to be experienced. And so these aren't going to be blowing super hard all year round, but during the winter, they tend to crop up more. And so these other winds, they're all seasonal. This helps, like, when sailors, maybe they take extra long getting back to their destination. Maybe someone's trying to get to Sicily around here, and someone says, hey, it took 3 weeks longer than normal. What's going on? And the sailor says, well, the Bora was a real pain this time. And everyone will go, yup, the Bora, I know. But it kind of helps them identify, like, what's going on wind-wise. But just for the winter season, these are the two deadly winds to watch out for. So you might be able to get away with sailing around here, but around here, very dangerous. That'll come into play again later, so just keep that in the back of your mind. Hopefully this is legible. This here is the island of Crete, and so Cyprus is here, Jerusalem is here. They kind of snaked their way along the coast, and they ended up here at Crete. This is a bigger map of Crete. And so right now, Paul and the gang, the 100 plus people, they're at this place called the Fair Havens on the southern edge of Crete, kind of in the middle. What the sailors are trying to do is to get them to go to Phoenix here, which is about 40 miles away. That is not that long of a journey. That is a day trip. You could do that in one day. And so it's really not that much of a stretch to say, hey, we don't want to spend winter here. For whatever reason, the Fair Havens were not actually that fair of a haven because they wanted to leave. They wanted to find a different place to harbor for the winter. I don't know why. Apparently, the waters around Crete, like especially by the Fair Havens, are notoriously rocky. So if something goes wrong and the ship breaks free from the harbor, splinters to pieces, they need a new ship and a lot of money to pay for a new ship. So for whatever reason, the sailors, the majority of the sailors vote, we're going to push on through, even though the winter season is right here, and we're going to try and go to Phoenix. Paul says, this is a bad idea. Don't do this. It's not that far of a distance, but Paul has done his fair share of sailing on the Mediterranean Sea at this point. He probably has a good grasp of what seasons are good to travel in and what seasons are not. And so he warns everybody on board, if we go through with this, I perceive there's going to be danger and loss and death. And the centurion, okay, to his credit, we can't throw him under the bus too fast. If I were Julius the centurion, if I were in charge of a group of 100 soldiers, and I was going sailing, I would trust the professional sailor's opinion over some random prisoner that we had, kind of makes a lot of sense. The captain of the ship, for whatever reason, was pretty confident that they could make it. And again, 40 miles day trip. If they get lucky, done. Easy. Piece of cake. And Paul tries to stop them from making this trip. The centurion doesn't listen to him to value the professional opinion more. That is what I would have done if I were Julius. Just knowing what I know, I would trust another sailor way more than some random prisoner. Now granted, Paul, he had a lot of experience, but he was not a sailor by trade. The captain was. And the captain said, we can make this 40-mile journey. We should be fine. It'll take us a day, maybe two. That's not what happens. It goes horribly wrong. But this is the game plan then. 40-mile trip, should be a day or two, easy peasy. Can I clarify anything? I'm throwing a lot at you. Can I clarify anything?
So Paul was taking his experience of being shipwrecked 3 times to say that, or do you think it was divine?
It seems that in this case, it wasn't a divine revelation given to him. Later on, he does expressly share a divine revelation that like a conversation he had with an angel later on in this very trip. But this time he doesn't bring that up. So I'm kind of inclined to believe that Paul is giving them a warning rooted in his own experience. God is, of course, at work in all of this. And maybe he gave Paul a message, but he gives no indication that he was contacted by the divine. But good question. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Let's see what happens then. Verses 13 through 20. In my Bible, this is labeled the storm at sea. There are multiple passages in Scripture labeled the storm at sea. And so in a sense, this is nothing new. God has done this to people before. He's not above doing it again. And so let's read verses 13 through 20 to get to the bottom of what happens with this brilliant plan of the centurion and the sailors. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. I want to do a timeout right here. That might be really confusing. The ship's boat. How does the ship have a boat? What does that mean? Has anyone been on like a catamaran or a monohull in the Caribbean before and have taken it around, or have someone take you around before in a boat like that, or maybe a bigger yacht? They almost always come with this smaller boat that has a motor on it. where you can hop on the small boat and be able to get to land that way. That's called a dinghy, is the proper term. Yep, David Weisman knows that. This is essentially a dinghy. That word boat in this particular verse, that word only appears in the Greek 3 times in all of Scripture, and it's only in this chapter. And it refers to a smaller boat, like a dinghy. Think of it, obviously didn't have a motor. Think of it as like a rowboat that they would use to get to land independently of how strong the wind is. It's not reliant on wind, it's reliant on muscle. And so the dinghy was at risk of floating away, which is bad, because if they find a place to moor, are you going to really risk, yeah, I'm a good swimmer, I can make it to shore? Nuh-uh, I'd much rather use the dinghy and trust that than myself. And so they had some trouble. They secured the ship's dinghy, a little boat that they used to get to shore from wherever they moored. Okay, time in, verse 17. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the 3rd day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all our hope of being saved was at last abandoned. Let's go to Phoenix, they said. It'll be fine, they said. No, it was not fine. Okay, so let's go back to the map here. Remember, the plan is to go from the fair havens here, which weren't so fair, to Phoenix, which would have been an ideal place to just stay put for the winter, so they would not have to sail during the winter. But this wind in the text is called the northeaster. In Greek, it's like the north, the east wind. It's really weird and confusing, but we just kind of massage it to be the northeaster. Remember what I told you about winds getting pet names? This happened back then too. This was no surprise wind. This was a wind that sailors knew and feared and labeled. This was the northeaster, and it's come to party this time. But notice too, remember what I told you about the lee and how wind is supposed to be calmer on the side of the lee? Technically, the northeaster, true to its name, is coming from the northeast. They're trying to sail on the lee of Crete. But it's so bad that the calm part is super duper rough. Does that make sense? Logistically, you'd think the sailors weren't dumb. They knew what they were doing. We're protected by the lee of the island. We're going to be fine from any northeastern wind. But no, the northeasterner came and it blew them off course. This island right here is called Cauda. You can barely see it, and so could they. So couldn't they? I don't know. But they kind of are able to get under the lee of Cauda, which somehow helps them. Must have been a tall island or something. But under the lee of Cauda, that's where they're able to secure the dinghy. And then they get whisked away. They have no idea where they're going or where they're at because the storm is so bad. They can't see the sun. They can't see the stars. They have no way to navigate and are completely at the northeasterner's mercy at this point. This is bad news bears is my official term for it. I'm going to throw a theory out there and leave it at that. But those 2 winds I talked about, the Mistral and the Bora, that are particularly strong during the winter, the Bora is notably coming from the northeast. It's going the same direction that the northeastern would have gone. I'm not saying that this was the Bora, but I am suggesting maybe it could have been. And obviously God's hand was at work through this, but it was not this out of nowhere surprise wind that the Gentiles had never encountered before. It had a name. This is the northeasterner, which we fear. And so perhaps God gave it a booster shot, but I tend to think that it was an existing wind. Perhaps this one. I'm just going to throw that out there. Just a little theory. And then you're like, what on earth is this? What are we doing in this class? There's this place that they want to avoid. And in the text, it's labeled as the Syrtis, Syrtis. Is that any other name in your translation? It'll be in verse 17. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis. Is it labeled by another name? No, it says Syrtis. Okay, so here's what's going on here. And I did some research on this because the text just doesn't tell us. The Syrtis is a sandbar. We're looking at a sandbar right now. Doesn't it look so pretty? Doesn't it look so fun? Sandbars are great when you're on the beach because, you can swim out a little bit from shore and the sand kind of dips a little bit and you kind of have to walk on your tiptoes, and then you're swimming because you can't touch the bottom, and then the sand comes up again, and suddenly, whoa, I'm like 50 feet from shore, and I'm standing on this sandbar, and I'm playing football with my dad, and life is great. It's what happened to me when I was a kid. We'd bring a football or a frisbee on the sandbar and toss it around. It was awesome. And when I was younger, I thought this is the closest I'll ever get to being like Jesus, because I'm walking on water right now. Maybe this is how he did it. And now that I'm older, I'm like, no, he actually walked on water. There was no sandbar trick. But it just made me feel really cool and divine. But anyway, sandbars, when you're at the beach, they're pretty fun. Sandbars for sailors are a nightmare. They do not want to end up on a sandbar. Any guesses as to why? It looks so pretty. The water's so clear. How could this be a threat? You get stuck. And especially with sandbars, the longer that a ship is stuck in the sand, the more stuck it tends to get. Okay? And on a sandbar too, no trees, no food, no drinkable water, no shade. If a sailor were to get stuck on a sandbar and they can't get the boat out right away, it is a guaranteed death sentence. Sandbars too are very difficult to spot. Islands, land ho, I can see it from really far away. Sandbars though, invisible until it's almost too late. You are able to see the size of the waves, and if they tend to recede a little bit and they get smaller, that's a clue then that the water is shallower and you need to get away from there. But this is not the literal picture of a Syrtis. I have no idea where in the world this is. I don't know if it's like a giant sandbar or a little one, but the sailors were familiar enough with the territory that they gave the sandbar a name and they all avoided it. And in order to avoid it, they started tossing everything out of the ship. We cannot land on the sandbar, on the Syrtis, no matter what. So cargo is thrown overboard, food is thrown overboard, tackle is thrown overboard, essential things that they need. Forget it. If we land on the Syrtis, we're dead meat. They don't start tossing prisoners overboard yet. I'm going to let that hang and circle back to it later. But right now they're fully intent on keeping everybody alive. That changes later on. This is a dark trip. This is not smooth sailing the whole way through. Okay, so they successfully avoid the sandbar, the Syrtis. They jettison all their cargo. And then Luke, at the very end, at the end of verse 20, he shares this really heartbreaking line. All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Everyone accepted, we're dead. There is no hope for us. Paul has been unusually quiet this entire time. Hasn't really said anything to anybody as far as we know. But that changes in the verses to follow, okay? So let's see what happens next then. This is a big, long chunk. But this gets us through much more of the journey. And so let's pick up at verse 21 and go all the way through 38. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, As we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. That's about 6 feet, or 2 meters. A little farther, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. That's about 90 feet or so. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat that's the dinghy, into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Okay, the plot really thickens from here. And so right away, when Paul stands up and begins to do his Paul thing and talk and point people to God, he says, "I told you! We shouldn't have done this. This was a bad idea." But then he doesn't just chastise them. He assures them that the God of the universe, the God to whom he belongs and worships, is on their side and has promised that everyone in this ship will survive. This is good news for them to hear because Luke says they had given up all hope of being all hope of being saved. And they just knew that they were all lost. And it's at this point when they are at rock bottom with no hope that Paul finally stands up and gives some good news. So very, very clever on Paul's part. Now, they're probably much more willing to listen to him because what else are they going to do? They don't have any hope. And so Paul gives them hope through God, who does very clearly send an angel to Paul to deliver a divine message. I will spare the lives of everyone, but you have to do what I say. That's kind of the caveat, and that comes into play in a little bit. So on the 14th day adrift, imagine just this 14-day storm where you're not able to control the boat or where it's going, and you're not able to see the sun or the stars. This is a long storm that they're in. So on their 14th day, there were some sailors that they were taking soundings. Sounding has nothing to do with sound in this day. Sounding was a way you would take a weighted string, throw it over the edge of the boat, it would sink, it'd hit the bottom, and you check the string oh, okay, the water's this deep around us. So they take some soundings, and they are aware of, hey, we're getting closer to shore. The sounding measurements they're getting smaller, they're getting shorter. And so some sailors, they pretended to hey, we're going to go check on the bow, which is the front of the boat. We're going to check on the bow real quick. We'll be right back. And Paul kind of catches them getting the dinghy ready so that they can make a break for it and go to shore. And Paul warns them and says, everyone has to stay in the boat to survive, in the big boat. You can't try and escape on the dinghy. And Julius listens to Paul, orders them to stop, and they go, oh, okay, and they listen. They cut the dinghy free, and so now they have no reliable way to get to shore, but they are listening to what God has told Paul to do. It's just interesting how most of the people involved here are Gentiles that know nothing about this God that Paul's talking about, but now they're suddenly willing to listen to him. It seems like he's on their side, so that's pretty cool. And then, in an effort to conserve food and to just eat as little as possible so that they could survive for as long as possible, Paul says, you've been exhausted, you haven't eaten very much, take some food now, and then when we're done, we'll throw it overboard and we'll be fine. And they listen to him. So it does say that he gives thanks, he breaks bread. This isn't a reference to communion. This is just, thank you, God, for this meal. And he just starts eating. And so the others are encouraged by his example. And I told you that we'd have the exact number of passengers later on. 276 people. 276 people total are on this boat. Does anybody know how many this sanctuary seats, like max capacity for Holy Cross's sanctuary? Any idea?
No, it's not 5.
I heard 300. No, I don't know. I guess if we really are curious, we can, everybody can line up in a pew, and then we can count how many pews there are and check room for up there too. But I'm going to say that, like, maybe, roughly, this place could probably fit 276 if everybody's packed together like sardines.
You have to sit in the front pew, too.
Yeah, what? We can't do that. The front pews are not for sitting. In the Lutheran Church, at least. So yeah, my guess is that, like, kind of the dimensions of this space that we're in, perhaps roughly the size of the boat that they were in. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. But this is not just like, hey, we're going to grab a dozen people and go to Rome. This is like almost 300 people are going on this trip together. They had a big boat, okay? And then, yeah, as I said, they eat, and then they, in order to get some weight off of the boat, they toss the leftover wheat, the leftover bread overboard. So they're taking God pretty seriously now, all of them, and just trusting what Paul has said as a last resort. What else are you going to do? Okay, and so even when all hope seems lost, God has not given up on them. And if God doesn't give up on people for which all hope seems lost, then not all hope is lost after all. And so let's pick up then with verses 39 through 44. And we'll go from there. Now, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then, hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bows stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. Whew. So they don't know where they are yet, but they're no longer on the boat, even though they do get in a shipwreck. The text tells us that they were aiming for the beach, but they did get stuck in, it's a reef in my translation. Alternatively, it could also mean sandbar. So I'm kind of inclined to believe that they just got stuck on the sandbar. Maybe it's a different word for you, but that Greek word can be taken in a couple different ways. But regardless, it's an elevated part of the ocean floor that snags the boat, whether it's a reef with coral or just a sandbar. But they get stuck, and that's not necessarily a problem. But I don't know exactly how the boat was positioned, but the bow, the front of it got stuck, and the back of it, the stern, was being battered by the waves to such a degree that it started to fall apart. It's kind of a miracle that the boat didn't start to fall apart before this happened, because they were in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea in a 14-day storm. I don't know who built that boat, but they deserve a raise. But the boat's officially out of commission. It's stuck and it's falling apart. We have to swim to shore because, we ditched our dinghy back there. Remember Paul? Curse you, Paul, for getting rid of our dinghy. So they're pretty much, their only option is to swim. The soldiers, in less of an effort to get rid of some weight on the boat and more of an effort to hey, what if these prisoners, they see land there, they're under our jurisdiction right now. If they make a run for it, we're not going to be able to catch them. So let's just kill them now and be done with it. And Julius goes, whoa. Don't do that. And he orders them to stand down, and they listen. And it specifically says that he wanted to save Paul. So it's possible that Paul's life was in danger at this moment. They were going to kill him too, even though he essentially saved them by listening to God's instructions and sharing God's promises with them. Paul was technically a prisoner, and they probably were going to make a move on him and try and kill him before they made it to shore. But Julius stopped them in order to save Paul's life and the rest of the prisoners. He orders everybody, those of you that can swim, swim to shore, good luck, you're on your own, make fires for us when you're there, start finding food, whatever. And for everybody else that couldn't swim, I don't know like the percentage of people who could swim and people who couldn't, I've got no clue. But they took like broken pieces of the boat and they kind of used it as kind of flotation devices, because wood floats pretty decently, and it's better than nothing for sure. And so everybody, every single person makes it to shore, just like God promised. He said, not one of you will be lost. And he made good on that promise, and everybody made it. They still don't know where they are quite yet, but they're off of the boat, and they're alive for the moment. And so God was faithful in a place where they had no hope and got them through just like he said that he would. Okay? Questions, comments before we wrap up? Yeah.
My Bible says reef.
Reef?
Yes.
Yeah. I have a footnote in mine that says reef or sandbar or cross currents. So
The question would be if the waves and wind is beating that boat, it would be more apt to tear apart in a reef
yeah.
than a sand, wouldn't it?
Maybe. I don't know. I've never been stuck on a reef or a sandbar, so I can't speak from experience. Yeah, reefs they're going to be rockier, and so it'll break the hull apart better than just sandwood, but it might get lodged in sand a little easier. So I don't know if it was a reef or a sandbar, but regardless, it was something that snagged the boat, and it was unable to move and just kept getting battered by the wind and waves. Yes, David?
Where is Malta that they ended up at? Where's that in the Mediterranean?
Malta?
Right.
Malta is where they ended up at. This is the island that they landed on. And so Malta, you probably can't see, it's this tiny little island right here.
On the south end of the Buddha.
Yep, the south end of Italy. So do I have any arrows here? Yes, okay. They started from the Fair Havens here. Over 14 days, things go terribly wrong. They have no idea where they are in the sea for 14 days, but this storm just pushes them this way, and they end up at this tiny little island, Malta, here. They're able to identify it once they get there, but they don't know what it is in advance. And so also just like the sheer luck, quote unquote, I'm doing heavy air quotes because it wasn't luck, but like the one island in this whole stretch, there's no other land here other than like Sicily itself. But for them to have no control for 14 days and to end up perfectly right there seems like that's a heck of a coincidence, or God's divine hand at work using the storm to get them to where they need to go. So, yes, divine intervention. That is where I'd lean. So, like statistically, this just wouldn't happen. They would probably miss it and just keep going, but.
If it was truly a northeasterly wind, it would have shoved them right into Africa.
Right.
They went. Yeah.
Yeah. So around here, who knows what exactly the wind was doing, but it was pushing them not in the direction that you would expect it to go. They ended up like completely west of where they were. How that happened, I don't know. God used the wind to just put them over there. And again, I don't know if it was a straight line. Maybe he just made them do loop-de-loops in the Mediterranean Sea for a couple days. If I were God, I would do that just for fun. If I was going to save all of them anyway, like, come on, what's the harm in that? But anywho, let's wrap up with Acts 28. I'm not going to talk about this too much. It's pretty self-explanatory, but we're pretty much done with all the boat drama. I want us to get Paul to Rome because his journey has been entirely dependent on us, and he's almost there. And so let's start with verse 1 of chapter 28, go to 16, we'll talk about it, and then we'll be done. And we were brought safely through, or after we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. Like, hasn't he been through enough already? Like, come on, man. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island, named Publius, who welcomed us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery, and Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly, and when we were about to set sail, they put on board whatever we needed. After 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria, with the twin gods as a figurehead. Putting in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days, and from there we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. And after 1 day, a south wind sprang up, and on the second day we came to Puteoli. There we found brothers, Christian brothers, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome. And the brothers there, when they had heard about us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and 3 taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. And when we came into Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with the soldier who guarded him. So just real quick, on the island of Malta, we see this is a running theme throughout the book of Acts, but Jesus' disciples, the apostles, people who follow him, they tend to act and speak a lot like Jesus himself does. And so here we see there are people who are sick and needy, and Paul is the one, essentially going on these pastoral visits, spending time with them, curing them, as Jesus himself once did. And so if not for this storm that blew them completely off course, Paul wouldn't have been able to help all these people in Malta. So God he's playing like 6-dimensional chess with us, and we don't even know it most of the time. Like Paul doesn't know he's going to be doing this on Malta, but God puts these people in front of him, and in return, they show him unusual kindness, give him a brand new boat, all the supplies they needed, and then they were able to safely, with no complications, make their way to Rome from there. And so from Malta, they stay here for the winter because sailing in winter is a bad idea. I think they learned their lesson at this point. Notice that they stay on the island for 3 months. So during the spring, when winter is over, high winds, heavy gusts, but if you know what you're doing, you're fine. And so they're able to go north from here to follow this route. They meet up with some Christian brothers that somehow were all the way in Rome at this point. I don't know how they got there, but they kind of beat Paul there. I don't know, maybe they took a car or something, or flew. And then Paul makes it all the way to his final destination to finally appeal to Caesar, to Rome. And there, he's kept under house arrest. He's put in a house, and there's just a single soldier that guards him. And this is kind of how he spends the rest of his days, is just living in house arrest under Rome with, a decent amount of freedom. He wasn't thrown in jail or prison. He had experienced that plenty already. But as far as we know, Paul's ultimate fate in Acts is just to spend his time under house arrest and proclaiming the gospel of Jesus to all who came to him. And he does eventually get his trial with Caesar. We don't really quite know what happens after that, but check out the rest of Acts 28 if you want to see how it ends. This is a thematically brilliant way for Luke to end Luke part 1 and Luke part 2. Kind of Luke and Acts together, they should be read together. But kind of Acts, Luke's whole account of the gospel of Christ and the church that he establishes, it ends with Paul going into the very heart of enemy Gentile territory, which is Rome itself, to proclaim the gospel there. And so, in the ancient world, this is the capital of the ancient world. The rulers of the ancient world are gathered in Rome. Obviously, the world is a much bigger place than just Greece and Rome. But for the Mediterranean region, Caesar was the king and the god of it all. And Acts ends with Paul bringing the gospel right on his doorstep. Thematically, brilliant. It's fantastic. That just is, it shows the mission of God, not just for one group of people, but for all people, even enemies of God. Jesus died for them too. This is made very clear. Now, okay, we talked a lot more about boats today and kind of really the science behind them. in this class a lot more than in our previous missionary journeys. Also, there was like nothing wrong really happened on the trips before, not that we know about. It was really rough getting to Rome with this particular trip. And so just humor me for a second, but like if they didn't have boats, if there were no access to boats and people never thought to invent them and they just weren't a thing, then how would the gospel of Christ during this time, how would it have spread to the ends of the earth like Jesus commanded? This illustrates a very interesting method of how God chooses to work in this world. He loves what he made so much, like everything in his creation, that he uses it to accomplish his own divine purposes. And so he uses boats to advance the gospel and to shape the church as we know it. I don't know, if boats were invented significantly later, or if we didn't have boats at all, perish the thought, what would I do? But you know, if there weren't boats, then the gospel would not have spread in the way that it did. Could God have figured out other ways to make it work out? Yes. He could have like taken people and just like flung them from continent to continent and then caught them on the other side. Like, God can do whatever he wants, but it kind of highlights that we have a God who is odd and works in like simple, very human ways to accomplish things of eternal significance. Think of baptism. It just takes simple water, combines it with his eternal word, and it affects us eternally. And Lord's Supper too, he takes these very plain elements, bread and wine, and Jesus comes to us through, in with and under those elements, to present us his very body and blood. God works through very simple, small means to accomplish things of eternal significance. Boats are just one of those things. And so I think that the world would look very different. We may not even be here if boats were never invented. Like, obviously, God would have found a way to make it work out, but this is how he chose to spread the gospel. It was primarily by taking the good news from continent to continent overseas. And, a lot of people today, we think, we don't really see these huge miracles anymore. Like we don't see God doing things like parting the Red Sea like he did in the Old Testament. We don't see people like Jesus literally walking on water unless they're pretending at a sandbar like I would. But we don't see like these huge miracles anymore. That's not how God prefers to work. He works through like ordinary little things. And I think that's the real miracle, is that we have this huge God who works in so many tiny, small, simple ways, including through us as well. This is just how he does things. And I just think it's endlessly fascinating that we have a big God that works through small things, even like boats, to accomplish things of eternal significance. And so hopefully that serves as a nice capstone to our discussion for today. We're over time. Do we have any final questions or comments before we move on with prayer requests and send you on your way?
Our small little things that God does is look at Joe Snyder in the back.
Mm-hmm.
That's our little small things that we see.
Yeah. There you are. Joe's up here. I was like, yes, Joe. There he is. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Kathy?
Well, in the beginning of Bible study, you said, when they were going from here to here, and this would just be so simple, just to make a straight line and just get there.
Yeah.
But God had another plan, and with his plan, they touched more people,
Mm-hmm.
came more into spirit, to, and in the end, Paul pointed out, why did we get here? Because of God.
Yeah.
The trust in God. And then there was more people that came, non-believers became believers.
Mm-hmm.
And I also see the fact that God took two things that he created, land and water. And he uses them both to spread his word.
Mm-hmm.
So land could be his body and the water is his blood.
Yeah.
With them both, we receive him.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like, I love the comment of they just wanted to go in a straight line and get there like as soon as possible with as little difficulty as possible. That's not how God works. You all know God does not free us from as little difficulty as possible. And in fact, we expect him to go straight forward, and he ends up sending us left or something. And this is just how he works, and he just knows what he's doing and is always in control. And you can either push back against him, or you can join with him and say, all right, whatever the plan is, just use me how you want. We trust that you're at work and that you know what you're doing, even when I just want to go in a straight line and get there as fast as possible. Yeah, God often, literally and metaphorically, just takes a different way than we think or we want most of the time. He's odd. He's an odd God. And it's just how he works. And what are you going to do about it? Then just love him for who he is and receive the love that he has for you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, then we have one more class in the Boats in the Bible study, and then it will be done. And it's also very fitting that we're ending this fun little experiment study of mine next time, because we also are having a potluck. Instead of snack before/during class, we're going to have a potluck lunch after class. Think of it as a way to celebrate just this group that we have here, and a fun way to leave this study in the past and move on to something different. I still need to make up my mind on what we're doing next. But there is, I believe, a sign-up sheet for the potluck on one of the tables in the Welcome Center. And so if you'd like to bring something, pretty please bring something, then find that sign-up sheet. I'm sure that all the details, like the different categories of food that you can bring, is on there. And so visit that sign-up sheet before you leave today, and we're going to have a potluck. We'll be in the gym, assuming that the heat works by then.
If not, we'll have to bring blankets.
Yes. Stay tuned, everybody. Stay tuned and have a blanket handy as well. But next time will be our last session with this particular study. There are only 3 references in all the epistles, which is bizarre to me, that involve boats. 1 in James, 2 in Revelation. So yay, we get to look at Revelation, and no one's going to understand it. It's going to be great. Revelation is notoriously difficult to understand. So with all this said, let's close with prayer requests. Is there anything that we can be praying for this week, Kathy?
Denise Lackey, she was experiencing back pain, so she's going to the doctor to get some relief.
Okay. Visiting the doctor today?
Pardon me?
Visiting the doctor today?
Yeah.
Okay. Others? George?
Paul, Judy, and myself, Halloween decoration, Paul and I were put up on the porch. Paul fell and broke his leg. This day, he's still recovering from that. I got out of an easy chair and he the main thing is we're good. A week from today, she'll go find out when she's gonna have eye surgery. It's major in that one eye. That's really in bad shape. The other eye they can take care of. So she's got that, plus some of the other problems he has. And I think we were in the emergency room. It's close to about 9 or 10 hours in the month of October.
Yeah.
And we said, get rid of October. Let's just get rid of that. But Paul's getting better. I'm better. And the affairs are really neat to get.
Is the date for her major eye surgery, is that set, or are they still figuring that out?
It's not set yet.
Oh, okay.
It's supposed to be next Wednesday, a week from today. She's already been to the eye doctor twice, and now it's a surgeon that has to get over it.
Okay. Okay. We'll be praying that that's in the calendar sooner rather than later, because, yeah, eye surgeries are no joke, especially if it's that bad. I'm sorry to hear that. The dogs are okay. Well, that's good. Paul, he's in a brace, from my understanding, with his leg right now.
He's got about another week to go on his leg, and then he's all upset because he can't measure.
Yeah, I know. Very sweet of him.
And a walker, but he's getting through that. He's getting better. You can tell
Okay.
that. And I'm better than I was.
All right.
One of the problems Jay had is he come around the corner and grab him and it fell. That was the first
Yeah.
And she fell and cut her forehead. And when she did it, there was problems she had with her blood and all that kind of stuff.
That was a
It was the first emergency ward, and they put them, they glued it.
Yeah.
And then everything was fine, and about 3 or 4 days later, she woke up and there's all kinds of redness.
Yeah.
On her nose. And she back to and said, let me ask you, you got AGS, you got your blood, it's thin, wherever you have to go somewhere, it's down to here, and that's because it was.
Yeah. Yep. We'll continue to lift them up in prayer. They really need it. Yeah. Others? Dawn?
My sister Shirley had fallen 2 days ago, so she's getting over that. No broken bones, but just a lot of healing that needs to take place.
Okay. Others? Neil?
Two things, since yesterday was Veterans Day, prayers for all our veterans from previous wars and also those currently serving. And also a prayer today for the vote in Congress that the shutdown would end so people can be paid and transportation can be done more smoothly.
Yeah. My sister's been directly affected by that, so I'm sick and tired of it. But yeah, we'll pray that the government shutdown would be over. Yeah. Anything else? Jan?
My son Scott is going to have surgery tomorrow.
I'm sorry, your son's?
My son Scott.
Your son Scott, okay. What kind?
They're going to remove a tumor from his kidney.
Okay. Okay. Others? Judy?
Continue prayers for Sandy as she starts her treatments.
I'm going to add Janine in there too.
Huh?
Janine Hafer as well. Yeah, both of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Others? Okay, let's close the prayer. Lord Jesus, we give you thanks and praise that your heart beats for all people everywhere, and you set this example so clearly through the acts of the early church. You do not just favor one group of people as your own, but all people are those that you have made and value and love and want to spend eternity with. And so I pray that you would give us hearts that match your own, that we would see all people around us, whether they are friends or enemies, as people that you died for, people that you rose again for, and people that you want to spend eternity with. So give us eyes and hearts just like your own, that we would do our part and participate in the ministry of the church that you call us all to participate in. So we just thank you, O Lord, for your great love for us, for those around us, and for the entire world. And help us to love this world like you do. We lift up to you many people who are in great need today, and we ask that you would bend your ear toward our prayer and have mercy on all who request and desire our prayers today. We lift up to you Denise Lackey, who's suffering some sort of a back pain and visiting the doctor today. We pray that this would be a fruitful visit, that there would be a good plan for treatment or medication or whatever is required to alleviate her discomfort. I just pray that you would bless that appointment today, that it would go well and work in her favor. We lift up to you the Kirbys, particularly Paul, who broke his leg about a month ago. We rejoice that he is on a steady recovery, that he is getting better and getting stronger. We ask that you would continue to rest your healing hand upon him and restore his leg to normal. And please bring him back here to Holy Cross quickly so that he can resume his duties as usher, which he loves so much, and we love him for it. And we also pray for our sister Judy, who needs to undergo a major eye surgery. We pray that this would be scheduled very soon, that she would be able to receive this treatment without delay. And for all the other ways in which she has suffered as well, we just ask that you would give her encouragement and healing according to your gracious will. We haven't been able to see her in a while, and we miss her. And so please bring her back to us very soon. We lift up to you Dawn's sister Shirley, who fell at home recently. We rejoice that she did not break any bones, but she still is in need of much healing. And so I pray that you would bless her recovery, that you would give her rest and strength in a timely manner, that you would heal her body of any injuries and set her back on her feet fully. as soon as possible. We give you thanks for the veterans that have served the armed forces in this country, O Lord. We thank you for raising up people to this very difficult vocation that not everybody is called to do. We thank you for the service of those who have fought for us to protect us and to protect others around the world as well. We thank you for the sacrifices that they and their families have made for this good endeavor. And we just give you thanks for those previous veterans and those currently serving. For those currently serving, continue to give them strength that they would promote justice and fight for people who cannot fight for themselves in this world. And so we thank you for still being at work, even throughout wars and fighting in this world for peace and justice. We also pray that you would end the government shutdown and restore people's jobs and employment back to them. There are many people that are just unable to provide for themselves as they should be right now, O Lord, and so we're down and the provision back very, very soon. We lift up to you Scott, who's undergoing surgery tomorrow to remove a tumor on his kidney. I pray that you would give him and his family peace as he undergoes this procedure. Bless the surgeons with precision, that they would do their job safely and well, and that he would be given healing according to your will. And finally, we also lift up to you our own sisters, Sandy and Janine, as they are undergoing their chemotherapy treatments. We just pray that you would have mercy on these two ladies and give them the healing that they and we so desperately want for them. Please encourage them that they would not lose heart or lose sight of your love and provision during this time. And I just pray that you would bless them with people who would love them and support them as they are undergoing this treatment. And we ask that it would be effective. All these and whatever else is on our hearts, we lift before the Father in your precious and holy name. Amen. Okay, everybody, thank you for joining me for a longer session than usual. We should be back in the gym next time. I will keep you posted on how the temperature is doing, but enjoy the rest of your day. Go with God. Visit the potluck sign-up sheet on your way out, and I'll see you when I see you. Thanks, everybody.
Ashley, you're